Gunfire cracked across the Arizona morning, sharp and violent, as Grace Jameson threw herself behind an overturned stagecoach wagon. Dust filled the air, horses screamed, and the desert sun burned down without mercy. She had come west to escape whispers and heartbreak, not to die in the sand at 35 years old. Arizona Territory, 1885, was no place for a Boston schoolteacher. Yet here she was, clutching her travel bag to her chest, while outlaws circled like vultures. Her heart pounded so loud, she thought it might drown out the gunshots. "Stay down, ma'am." The voice was deep, steady, almost calm. A tall rider leapt from his horse and landed beside her in a cloud of dust. He moved with the ease of someone who belonged to danger. His hat shadowed his face, but his jaw was sharp and set with purpose. 2 quick shots rang out from his revolver. One outlaw fell, the others scattered. Grace stared at him, stunned. He could not have been more than 25. Strong shoulders, lean frame, eyes like a brewing storm when he finally looked at her. "Thomas Ali," he said, not taking his eyes off the retreating riders. "Folks call me Tucker." "I'm Grace Jameson," she answered, her voice shaking. He gave a small nod, then scanned the wreckage. The driver was dead. The guard, too. The other passengers had fled into the desert. "You hurt?" he asked. She swallowed and shook her head. Without another word, he helped her to her feet. His hands were rough from work, but careful. When the sunlight hit his face fully, she saw something unexpected there. Not just courage. Kindness. "What's a lady like you doing out here alone?" he asked as he retrieved his horse. "I've taken a teaching position in Tucson," she replied, trying to gather her dignity. He raised one eyebrow. "Long way from Boston." She stiffened slightly. "Yes." He studied her for a moment, then lifted her onto his horse before she could argue. When he swung up behind her, she felt the warmth of him at her back. The closeness made her breath catch in a way the gunfire had not. 15 miles to Rattlesnake Springs, he said. "We won't make it before dark if we waste time." The ride was long and quiet at first. The desert stretched endlessly around them. Heat shimmered over rocks and cacti. Each movement of the horse brought her into brief contact with his chest. It was steady, strong, alive. She tried to focus on safer thoughts. "How long have you been in Arizona, Mr. Ali?" 10 years, he answered. "Came from Kentucky at 15. 15. While she had been attending finishing school and dreaming of teaching, this boy had been carving a life from dust and survival. They stopped at a creek before sunset. When he helped her down, his hand spanned her waist easily. For a brief second, their eyes locked. Something passed between them, something neither named. By nightfall, Rattlesnake Springs came into view, a small cluster of buildings beneath a fading sky. Not Boston, not even close, but it had life. He took her to Mrs. Reed Henderson's boarding house. Warm light spilled from the windows. Safety at last. "You're not staying?" she asked when he remained on the porch. "Got business," he said. "I'll check on you tomorrow." She did not know why that disappointed her. The bath Mrs. Henderson prepared washed the dust from her skin, but it could not wash away the memory of Tucker Ali's steady gaze, nor the way her heart had felt strangely alive during that ride. The next morning, the town buzzed about her arrival. Children peeked at her from behind their mothers' skirts. Within hours, she had agreed to teach them while she waited for the next stage to Tucson. Tucker appeared at the schoolhouse window that afternoon, watching, not intruding, just there. She felt it, his attention. Over the next days, something grew quietly between them. walks by the creek, supper at the small restaurant, shared laughter under desert stars. He listened when she spoke of Boston, of the broken engagement, of the humiliation she had fled. That headmaster was a fool, he said simply. No pity, no judgment, just truth. At the town dance, he stood before her in a clean black suit, his expression almost reverent. You look beautiful, he said. When they stepped outside beneath the stars, he spoke plainly. You've become important to me. She felt her heart tremble. I'm 35, she said. You're barely 26. Does that matter so much? He asked. It does to me. His eyes softened. I don't see your years, Grace. I see strength. I see kindness. I see a woman who makes me want to be better. She tried to remain sensible. She had a contract in Tucson, a future already decided. But when she climbed into the stagecoach days later, leaving Rattlesnake Springs behind, her chest felt hollow. 5 miles down the trail, a rider came fast across the desert. The Tucker. He dismounted breathless. I love you, he said. I know it's fast. I know it doesn't make sense, but I had to try. She felt fear rise inside her, fear of being hurt again, fear of foolishness. I am too old for you, she whispered. He stepped close, his hand gentle on her cheek. Then let me be young enough for both of us. And he kissed her softly, not with urgency, not with recklessness, but with promise. In that moment, Grace understood something simple. Life was not measured by numbers. It was measured by courage. She turned to the stagecoach driver. I believe I'll need my luggage back. Tucker's eyes filled with hope. You're staying? He asked. For the school, she said. Then she met his gaze. And for you. Years later, when she stood beside him at the door of the Rattlesnake Springs schoolhouse, yet their daughter laughing in his arms, Grace would think back to that desert road, the moment she had almost ridden away. And she would know, without doubt, that love does not ask how old you are. It only asks if you are brave enough to choose it. The town dance ended, but the storm inside Grace's heart did not. That night, after Tucker walked her back to Mrs. Henderson's porch, neither of them moved for a long moment. The lantern beside the door flickered softly, throwing golden light across his face. He looked younger when he was unsure of himself, and for the first time since she met him, she saw hesitation in his eyes. You're still leaving Wednesday, he said quietly. She nodded, though the word felt heavy inside her chest. I have a contract in Tucson, so they're expecting me. Tucker swallowed and looked down at the wooden steps beneath his boots. Then I reckon I've got 3 days. 3 days for what? She asked, even though she felt the answer coming. To make you change your mind. Her breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her like that. No fancy promises, no smooth talk, just truth. The next morning, Grace tried to focus on her lessons, but her thoughts kept drifting. Tucker stood outside the schoolhouse longer than usual. He pretended to adjust his saddle, pretended to check the road, but she knew he was watching her. At noon, he stepped inside. The children cheered when they saw him. The boys crowded around him with questions about horses and rifles. The girls whispered and giggled behind their hands. Grace watched him kneel down to speak to little Samuel Cooper, and his voice patient and warm. You're doing good work here, he told her later when the children ran outside. They are bright children, she replied. They only needed a chance. So do you, Tucker said softly. She felt her pulse quicken. What does that mean? It means you've been running from something, he answered. And maybe you don't need to run anymore. His words struck deeper than she expected. She had come west to escape shame and whispers, to hide from the hurt of betrayal. But somewhere between gunfire and desert sunsets, She had begun to feel alive again. That evening, Tucker brought her a small leather-bound book. "Open it later," he said. Inside was a book of poetry she once mentioned loving back in Boston. He had sent all the way to Tucson for it. Grace traced the underlined lines with trembling fingers. "At a perfect woman, nobly planned, to warn, to comfort, and command." Tears filled her eyes. When Tucker returned after supper, she sat waiting on the porch with the book in her lap. "How did you know?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "You talk different when you speak about poetry, like it matters." "It does matter," she whispered. "So do you." The next day passed too quickly. Word had spread that she was leaving. Parents came to thank her. Children brought small gifts: a drawing, a ribbon, a stone from the creek. Her heart felt pulled in two directions. That afternoon, Tucker helped her pack the last of the school books. He moved quietly beside her, jaw tight. "I won't be there tomorrow," he said suddenly. Her head lifted. "What?" "Got business at the Chapman Ranch," he replied. "Figured it'd be easier that way. Easier." God, the word stung. They walked slowly back to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. The sunset painted the sky in orange and gold. Everything felt fragile. At the porch steps, Tucker stopped. He looked at her like a man standing on the edge of something final. "I meant what I said," he told her, "about you being important." Before she could overthink it, before fear could take control again, she stepped forward and kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, careful, then deeper, honest. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he breathed. The words echoed in her heart long after he walked away. That night, Grace barely slept. She turned the decision over and over in her mind. Tucson offered safety, a steady job, a sensible life. Rattlesnake Springs offered something uncertain, something dangerous, something real. Morning came with heavy skies and heavier thoughts. The town gathered to see her off. Children cried openly. Mothers hugged her tight. The stagecoach rolled into the street. Grace scanned the crowd once more. No Tucker. Her chest tightened, but she forced a smile and climbed inside. The door shut. The wheels began to turn. Dust rose behind them. She leaned out the window, watching the town shrink into the distance. 5 miles later, a rider appeared across the desert. Her heart knew before her eyes did. "Tucker," she whispered. He rode fast, hard, desperate. "Stop the coach," she called to the driver. When Tucker reached her, he jumped down from his horse without waiting for it to settle. "I wasn't going to come," he admitted, breathless. But I couldn't let you leave without saying this." She stepped closer. "I love you," he said again. "I know I'm younger. I know it's quick. But I've never felt more sure of anything." Fear rose inside her like a wall. "I am too old for you," she whispered. Tucker's hand lifted to her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she did not realize had fallen. "Then let me be young enough," he said softly. He kissed her gently. The desert wind moved around them. The stagecoach driver shifted impatiently. Grace felt her heart standing at a crossroads. Safety or love. She turned slowly toward the coach, then back toward Tucker. Everything waited on her next words. The desert wind moved around them, carrying dust across the empty road as the stagecoach driver cleared his throat behind her. Grace looked at Tucker's face. Not at his age, not at the lines of worry near his eyes. She looked at the way he stood there, hat in hand, heart completely unguarded. He had not come to argue. He had come to risk everything. I am too old for you, she whispered again. But this time the words felt weaker. Tucker stepped closer, his voice steady, not desperate. Grace, when I met you, I didn't see 35. I saw courage. I saw a woman who stood up after gunfire and didn't crumble. I saw someone who made this town better in 2 weeks. He paused, swallowing. I saw someone I don't want to lose. Her heart trembled. She thought about Boston, about the cold looks, the whispers after her broken engagement, the way she had packed her life into one trunk and fled west because staying meant shrinking. Then she thought about Rattlesnake Springs, and the children's bright faces, Mrs. Henderson's warm kitchen, Tucker's quiet strength. The stagecoach driver spoke again. Ma'am, we can't wait all day. Grace closed her eyes for a second. She had lived her whole life making sensible choices, proper choices, safe choices, and still, she had ended up alone. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight at Tucker. If I stay, she said slowly, it won't be because I'm afraid to leave. His jaw tightened. I'd never want that. It will be because I choose this. Choose you. Choose this town. Hope flickered across his face, fragile and bright. Grace, he breathed. She turned toward the stagecoach. Driver, she called, her voice clear now. I believe I'll need my luggage back. The driver blinked, confused, but climbed down without argument. The trunk was lowered into the dust. Tucker stared at her like he was afraid she might change her mind. You're staying? He asked quietly. She stepped toward him, closing the small distance between them. I'm staying, she said. For the school, for those children. Then her voice softened. And for you. Something broke open in his expression. Relief. Joy. Disbelief. He pulled her into his arms and lifted her clear off the ground, spinning her once in the desert road. She laughed, the sound light and free, nothing like the careful woman who had arrived weeks before. Put me down, she said, breathless. He set her on her feet, but did not let go. You won't regret this, he promised. She placed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. I already don't. They rode back to Rattlesnake Springs together, her perched in front of him on the gray horse once more. But this time, she was not leaving. She was returning. When they reached town, word had already spread. Children ran into the street. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch, arms crossed, but smiling wide. Knew you'd come to your senses, the older woman declared. Grace embraced her tightly. Within months, the schoolhouse began to rise on the edge of town. Wooden beams, fresh boards, wide windows to let in desert light. Tucker helped build it himself, working long hours after tending to his other duties. Grace watched him sometimes from a distance, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand, building not just a school, but a future. By winter, the schoolhouse stood complete, and just before Christmas, beneath lantern light and falling desert snow that barely touched the ground, Tucker asked her to marry him. He did not kneel with grand speeches. He simply took her hands and said, I don't want to grow old without you. She smiled through tears. Good, she replied, because I have no intention of letting you. They were married in the small church at the edge of town. The children scattered wildflowers along the aisle. Mrs. Henderson cried openly. Sheriff Bailey pretended he had something in his eye. Grace became Mrs. Ali, though she kept her maiden name at the schoolhouse door. She was proud of both. Years passed not in silence, but in fullness. 3 years later, Grace stood in the doorway of the Rattlesnake Springs schoolhouse, watching students spill out into the afternoon sun. The building was sturdy, warm, alive with laughter. Inside the house she shared with Tucker, their daughter Emma napped peacefully. That afternoon, Tucker left a small note on her desk. "Meet me where it all began." Grace carried Emma in her arms and walked out to the very spot where gunfire had once echoed and changed her life. Tucker waited beside the gray horse. "Happy anniversary," he said. "Of what?" she teased. "Of the day you decided to be braver than your fear." She smiled. He took Emma gently from her arms and kissed the baby's forehead. "Any regrets?" he asked. Grace looked at the horizon stretching wide and endless before them. She thought of Boston, of Tucson, of the road she almost chose. Then she looked at her husband, at her daughter, at the schoolhouse visible in the distance. "Not one," she said softly, and he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Age difference and all?" he teased. She laughed. "It was never about age," she replied. "It was about courage." He kissed her gently, the desert sun warm against their skin. And as the sky turned gold, Grace understood something she wished she had